We have a representative group here to present a K-12 mathematics update. So I'm going to give the committee a second to introduce themselves, starting with Jeff Corbishley.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Corbishley, the 612 Math Science Supervisor.
Hi, Jared Pepe, Assistant Principal at the high school.
Angela King, the Special Education Supervisor at the high school.
Good evening, everyone. Linda Johnson, Director of Elementary Education.
Good evening, Jamie Palladino, District Math Coach, K-5.
Can we just scoot down a little bit? Sorry, Tom. Just so I can't see Angela. There we go. Okay, so this evening, we're going to be sharing a few things with you. But before we begin, we want to go through the comprehensive approach to mathematics that we have here in Ridgefield. Then we're going to give you updates on elementary mathematics, secondary mathematics, and then we're going to end with a reminder of the kinds of supports that we have for students, both on the enrichment side and on the intervention side. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda, who's going to start with talking about the comprehensive approach.
So Linda, you can use the regular mics if it's easier. Yep.
There you go. And Jamie, you can
Great.
use the one as well in front of you.
Wonderful. So again, good evening, everyone. We're very excited to be here this evening. And we are going to start out by talking a little bit about our comprehensive approach to teaching mathematics, kindergarten through 12th grade. So Jeff and I are going to take on that part of our presentation. So our comprehensive approach to teaching mathematics, again, kindergarten through 12th grade, is aligned to the Common Core State Standards, and it's the content standards as well as our 8 mathematical practices. And what you see here is a graphic that may look familiar to some of you. We've referred to it in the past presentations to you all, Board of Education, as well as parent presentations. And these really are our guiding light, if you will, around what we value in terms of teaching and learning mathematics. And I'm going to speak a little bit, just very briefly, about the 3 components: conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, real-life application. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who will talk about the 8 mathematical practices. And what's important to note, and I know you've heard me say this in the past, and I'll continue to say it, is that we value these components equally. Not, one doesn't outweigh the other. We truly believe in each component in terms of developing our flexible mathematicians. So I'll talk a little bit about conceptual understanding. And that's where we teach our students the meaning of mathematics, what they are learning and why it's important to learn the math behind the term, the skill, the concept. And when we think about conceptual understanding, again, it really emphasizes the purpose for learning. And what we know about mathematicians is that if we can build some form of relevance in their learning, there's a pretty good chance that our mathematicians will learn the skill or the concept because they're seeing the purpose for that learning. In terms of procedural fluency, that's where we connect students' learning to computational fluencies, so that our mathematicians can become flexible with different operations, efficient, and they're able to be flexible with their thinking in terms of making decisions around which operation they need to work toward, and a strategy that will make sense given a certain problem. And the last piece there is our real-life application, and oftentimes we refer to this as problem solving. And this is when students have an opportunity to apply their conceptual understanding and procedural fluencies to real-world problems. And that's where students have an opportunity to apply their reasoning skills, critical thinking skills, and oftentimes they'll work with a partner or partnerships, so they're also developing their collaboration skills. And assessment. Assessment is an important part of our process. Our teachers assess students' learning in many, many different ways, formally, informally. We have curriculum-based assessments, we have standardized assessments, and that's a constant loop, looking at how our students are responding to instruction, and then making adjustments along the way. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who will talk about the 8 practices.
Great, and in this graphic, you'll also see that around the conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and applications are the 8 mathematical practice standards. So again, these are practices that we really are hoping to build over time from K or pre-K through 12th grade. So as students get older, they really dive into these practices and become more mature within these ways of thinking. So there are 8 general practices. You'll see the ones on the left that are vertical. Those are really more habits of mind. So that's where students are making sense of problems, they're showing their perseverance in solving those problems, and they're attending to precision, right? Two very important areas of mathematics. And then on the right side, you'll see that there's other certain buckets. So sometimes in some topics, we may ask students to reason abstractly, or maybe it's quantitatively, looking more at numbers. It might be more about constructing viable arguments. It could be about modeling with mathematics, and that could look differently at the elementary, middle, and high school level. It's also about what tools are at your disposal. Are we using technology? Right? Are we using manipulatives? So there's what things can you use to help gain mathematical understanding, and also looking for structure. So that's a lot where you're starting to generalize things, and when you're looking for repeated reasoning to make that generalization. So as you can see, all these practices are things that we want our students to grow in. They just look a little different depending on what level the students are in the class. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Linda, and she's going to give an update on our elementary program.
Okay, so think mathematics. Last year, you heard a lot about the process that we went through in terms of studying a current program that was in place, and then looking at other resources that we considered adopting for a new primary resource. And here we are, where we have adopted and implemented Think Mathematics as our primary resource for teaching mathematics in grades 3 through 5, with the intention of implementing in kindergarten, first and second grade next year. What's important to note is that our curriculum has not changed. Our curriculum is still aligned to those Common Core state content standards and the practices that Jeff and I just spoke about. What has changed is that primary resource that teachers are using to teach into the learning outcomes. Still the same grade level learning outcomes at the end of each grade level. It's now looking at having a consistent, coherent resource to teach into the standards that we're obligated and responsible for teaching at each grade level. Another big piece of news, of course, is having our district math coach, our district math specialist, Jamie Palladino, in the role of working in all of our elementary schools, supporting our students, our teachers, our administrators. I'll say a great support for me as well in the position that I'm in to implement this resource with consistency. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about our focal points, our focus for the implementation stage. And there's 3 main areas that we're looking at throughout the school year. And they are lesson structure, instructional strategies, and common assessments. So when we think about lesson structure, we think about the different components of a lesson, the different parts of a lesson, if you will, and the order that we teach them in. They're very intentional, very purposeful. We really take a look at what we're teaching in each part of that lesson. And then we look at the instructional strategies. How we're teaching at the beginning of a lesson, let's say, what's a good strategy for a middle, and maybe wrapping up a lesson at the end. So we're focusing on teaching into different parts of a lesson and some highly effective practices that have been a part of our district for a good number of years, and then also bringing in some new practices. Then, of course, we are looking at common assessments that are both formal and informal. You're going to hear Jamie talk a little bit more about each of these areas: lesson structure, instructional strategies, and common assessments, and how they connect directly to the resource, Think Mathematics. Other part of our implementation stage is a continuous loop that includes professional learning and feedback. So this evening, I'm going to speak a little bit about the various structures that we do have in place to develop and to continue to develop our teachers in terms of teaching elementary mathematics. And then feedback. We're collecting feedback from various stakeholders. One of the most important ones, our students. We really are keeping a close eye on how our students are responding to instruction, how they're responding to familiar familiar practices and then some practices that might be new to them. And then, of course, along the way, making adjustments as needed. So what I'm going to do next is turn it over to Mr. Palladino, who's going to describe these different parts as they're related to this resource.
Thanks, Linda. Think Mathematics has 4 important components to each lesson. They include an anchor task, explicit teaching, guided practice, and independent practice. Throughout these 4 components, teachers are embedding formative assessments to direct their instruction and using a number of instructional strategies to help students become independent, strategic learners. Next, I'll break down each component for you. Students start every lesson off with an opportunity to have an inquiry with what we call an anchor task. An anchor task is a problem given to students at the beginning of the math lesson. It provides an opportunity to activate prior knowledge, requires students to collaborate in small groups, and ask questions of each other. It promotes an environment where students can be productively struggling and persevere through problem solving. During this time, which should last approximately 10 minutes, students are encouraged to try various strategies through concrete, pictorial, and abstract modalities in order to create multiple retrieval entry points for information. While students are collaborating, the teacher acts as a facilitator by posing questions and guiding their thinking. He or she also monitors students for understanding prior to the lesson to help drive the instruction of that day. The teacher then moves on to what we call explicit teaching. This includes what we call a board plan. In the board plan, a teacher is a student's role model in how to record mathematical thinking. Students see different ways mathematical ideas are communicated and different strategies to solve problems being taught in the lesson. Teachers generate a record of the class discussion, or the board plan, which students refer back to during the guided and independent practice. Teacher then moves on to what we call the Let's Learn. This is the part of the lesson where students look at the textbook pages to notice how their friends in the textbook have solved the problems. Students compare the methods they have discussed on their anchor task to the ones the textbooks, and they share similarities and differences. This is also an opportunity for teachers to teach students a method that may not have surfaced during the anchor task or the board plan. Once the teacher has framed the learning with the students during the explicit teaching, they move into the guided practice. Students practice what they have just learned with support to ensure correct understanding. The guided practice consists of a few tasks. This support can take many forms. It includes partner work, it could be a math game, or it could be small group work with a teacher for remediation or enrichment. All with the goal of creating a deeper understanding of the concepts taught that day. From there, students have the opportunity to have independent practice. Independent practice also extends learning and deepens their understanding. Independent practice offers opportunities for differentiating. It also is another opportunity for teachers to have students reflect and assess their own understanding, which could come in the form of a journal. Journaling allows students to revisit, refine, and extend their ideas. It can help teachers guide instruction, differentiate a task, reinforce learning skills, and help identify and address misconceptions that have happened during the day. As Linda shared with you, teachers are continuously assessing throughout all these components and changing the direction of the lesson as needed. At the end of each lesson, at the end of each unit, all 6 schools give common assessments that are created with common scoring guides for all 6 elementary schools. All of this great work is wrapped around with professional learning for our teachers. We know that research tells us that professional learning should be ongoing. It should be collaborative, with teacher choice, in an environment where risks are encouraged. It needs to be relevant and should have a coaching partnership. Linda's going to walk us through some of the great professional learning that is happening that aligns right with this research.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So our professional learning plan for the year centers around continuing our teachers' understanding, developing their understanding of content as well as pedagogy. And it centers back to, or connects back to, the conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and real-life applications. So what's important to keep in mind when we think about growing our teachers is that there's two buckets, if you will, two lanes, is that we have content knowledge, right? What are we teaching? Like, making sure that our teachers understand the math that they're responsible for teaching our young ones. And then the pedagogy, right? Like, what are the instructional strategies? What are the assessment techniques that our teachers are using to teach that content? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're doing that this year. And again, always bringing it back to those three components in the 8 mathematical practices. So at the I'm super excited to talk about the new position that we have in place this year and that we are all very, very grateful for. I will say, in my experience, I have not had a district coach, a district math specialist to work with, especially when we look at implementing a new curriculum resource across 6 elementary schools. We know that for a good number of years, we've had outstanding building math specialists, right? And I'm going to remind us that they have been the anchor to our elementary math program for a good number of years. They've done a heavy lift. They've done really good work in developing our elementary curriculum alongside our building administrators. And now we have a district coach who works across all 6 schools supporting primary role this year. Jamie's primary role is supporting the implementation of Think Mathematics in grades 3 through 5. So he's doing that in various ways. He attends grade level meetings on a regular basis where teachers have great input. You heard Jamie mention the power of choice. Teachers have input into that grade level meeting agenda where they express their needs, their desires, their wants for a planning session with Jamie, along with our building math specialist who does attend those meetings as well as the work that I'm going to talk about in our classrooms in a minute as her schedule permits. So we have consistent grade level planning time. Jamie is also pushing into classrooms, and that's where he's working with teachers in various ways. He might be leading a lesson. He might be co-teaching a lesson. We also have what we call parallel teaching, where maybe classroom teacher is teaching while Jamie's teaching at the same time, with the intention of growing our understanding of how to implement this resource, the content piece and the instructional strategy piece. We also have as I mentioned, our building math specialists who are pushing into our classrooms, again, as their schedules allow, to work alongside Jamie and our classroom teachers. And then, of course, district and building math specialists continue to work with our students, collecting that feedback from their learning, collecting feedback from teachers, and then we make collective decisions as a district around how we need to respond. We've also formed a relationship with Sarah Schaefer, who is one of the co-authors of the program, of the textbook, Think Mathematics. She's also the founder of Mathology, which you may remember is the other side, the professional learning side to the resource Think Mathematics. Actually, one of the big reasons why we decided to go with this resource was because we felt very confident with the professional learning platform that they offered. So we kicked off the year with Sarah Schaefer, where she was in district. We were super excited. I'm super excited to share that our first professional learning session with her, we had all 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers in one session together, really learning about the approach that we were going to use to implement this resource. And it's pretty significant if you think about having 3 grade levels together to talk math. You know, anything from the materials, the resources that they would be using for teaching, the pedagogy, student materials. And then we did break into grade level meetings after that where there was grade level specific professional learning sessions for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. We are really fortunate to bring Sarah back to district last month. You may have seen some photos in some of our newsletters out there from our principals and from Dr. De Silva, where Sarah did visit each elementary school, and that's where our teachers in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade had an opportunity to engage in a form of lesson study. And that's where teachers did some pre-planning, some pre-discussion with Sarah. And then Sarah would teach a lesson, and then we were able to debrief after the lesson. Those sessions included classroom teachers, math specialists, district coach. We had administrators and special educators attended as often as they could. And then when possible, our classroom teachers turnkeyed the lesson that they saw Sarah teach, whether it was, within 10 minutes, we had our 5th grade teachers going into 2 classrooms giving it a go, or the next day if it was off sequence on a grade level. And that work is pretty powerful for those of you who have been, who have done any work with a lesson study, to really be able to look at how our own students respond to instruction when we have a guest teacher and talk about teaching and learning. It was significant. And then Sarah has provided some content workshops as well. As recent as last month, we had our teams come back together and we looked at the learning progressions around multiplication and division from 2nd grade all the way through 5th grade. And we are fortunate that she is going to be coming back to district in the spring. And to note that, again, it's a constant reflection process where we're saying, okay, what's working? We're definitely asking what's not working. We're asking our teachers what feels good, what doesn't feel good. Because when you go to implement a new resource, whether you're familiar with some of it or not, there's some sticky parts to it. So we are listening. We're listening closely to our teachers, our building administrators, again, really looking at our students and how they're responding and making adjustments when needed. But last but not least, I do want to mention here on my blue Post-it note, so I didn't forget, we've really been making it a point to communicate with our community as well. And some of you may have noticed our principals have curriculum corners or spotlight on curriculum in their weekly newsletters, where Jamie Palladino has been writing up some little snippets about Think Mathematics, the different parts of the lesson, as well as other content areas. Not only Think Math, but we have foundations in there, other content areas, our essentials as well. We've also made it a point to have a presence in Dr. De Silva's newsletters this year. A big thank you to Allison Pratt. She has followed us along from the beginning, taking photographs as recent as last week when we had our 5th and 6th grade math teachers come together. And it really was a neat process. Jeff will talk a little bit about it in a minute. So we did have our 5th and 6th grade teachers talking about the transition process. And then we will be having parent presentations this winter from a district perspective around the adoption of this new resource. We will also come back to our 5th to 6th and other grade math placements process. And it's really nice to note that some of our PTAs have also put on presentations with the support of our math specialists around this new resource. So they've worked with our principals, with our building specialists for building-based presentations and work. So that's our Think Math resource. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff now, who's going to talk about secondary education.
Great, thanks, Linda. So there's a lot going on in secondary mathematics at both the middle and the high school. So I'm just going to highlight an example in each area, one at the middle school, one at the high school, of some of the specific work that's happening. And as Linda said, that transition from 5th to 6th is really important. So one of the things at that meeting when the 5th and 6th grade teachers came together was to really talk about some of the curricular changes that are happening at the 6th grade level. That coordination so that students have a seamless experience is really important. But it does highlight some of the work that the middle school teachers have been doing. And I will say I'm very proud of all the middle school teachers. They really have embraced this work. They've come together across buildings, across grade levels to do this work. So it's really impressive to help lead the teachers in that. So last spring, we put together a team of teachers who then did some summer curriculum writing. So one team of teachers comprised of multiple grade levels across schools was looking at remapping our state standards to our curriculum pathways. So we have our grade level pathway, Math 6, Math 7, Math 8. We have an acceleration pathway that's Math 6 accelerated, 7 accelerated that leads into Algebra 7, and finally a 6 accelerated that leads to Algebra 7 and Geometry 8. So as you can see, there's a lot of complication as you move from different course to course. So the purpose of the mapping project was to really ensure that as students move from course to course, they're not missing key standards, and that every student is really exposed to all the key mathematics, so there's no gaps. So that was the primary purpose of that team coming together. And the second part of that process this summer was we had a team of teachers that rewrote our Math 6 and Math 6 accelerated curriculum. So they used the standard mapping project to then know how to design the units for those two courses. So for both courses, again, the main instructional areas of conceptual understanding, the procedural fluency, and the application is woven throughout every single unit. Specifically, what this team did is looked at the content standards. So they looked at the Math 6 and made sure that all the grade level standards were addressed within that course. So that was a pretty standard process. However, when we did a deeper dive into the existing way that we taught our standards, we found there were some areas that maybe weren't in full alignment. So that allowed us to move certain topics that were traditionally in Math 6 to Math 7, because they're really 7th grade standards, which allowed more opportunity in Math 6 to give more time and energy to some of the target areas. So that's important to talk about, because even though it's still mapping to the standards, we have to look with a close lens to see how we can do better within our grade level pathway. The other course that the team worked on is the Math 6 Accelerated course. And what that group did is they mapped all of the grade level standards, and then they intentionally chose specific grade 7 standards that made sense to teach in that context of the grade 6 standards. Specifically, one of the major areas is rational numbers and operations with rational numbers. The reason that was so key is it could be woven throughout and spiraled throughout multiple units through the year, and that particular area would really benefit our 7 accelerated and our Algebra 7 students as they move from 6 to 7. So that's just a really quick highlight of the work that's happening with our curriculum team. They're currently piloting these 2 courses, and I will say that the 4 6th grade teachers are working extremely collaboratively across buildings and within their buildings to make small adjustments as things come up to be responsive to student needs. So that work is undergoing as we speak, with the hope of this summer, not the hope, but this summer, we will be writing our 7th grade curriculum as well, so that those students are prepared for the next course. So that's a brief update on the middle school progress. We also have some exciting work at the high school that we are just undertaking, and that is really the development of what we are calling the Math Pathways Collaborative Action Team. So what's important about this work is that we really have a goal to really study the mathematical experiences that our students are having as they move through their sequence of math courses at the high school. So it's important to note that really the collection, the type of courses, the level of courses that students take in high school really has a profound effect on the trajectory of what students have available to them upon graduation. So it's really important for us at the high school to look deeply at what are those experiences for students from course to course. And we recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach really does not provide all students with the necessary mathematics that could benefit them in their future in whatever field that they choose to go into. So our team is really comprised of a lot of individuals. We have high school math teachers, we have high school science teachers that are representing biochem and physics perspectives. We have middle school math teachers, we have special educators from the high school, we have high school administrators, we have the math leaders from the middle school, and we have myself. So we really have a broad team approach to try to think about all the various lenses of a student's experience. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jarrett Pepe. So Jarrett and Angela King, the 2 of them along with me, we've each spearheaded our first stage, which is the fall, and we've spearheaded a specific subcommittee. And the subcommittees really deal with what are the essential concepts that all students need before they graduate, and also look at some of the study of some current practices. So I'm going to pass it over to Jarrett to take it from here.
Thank you, Jeff. So as Jeff said, our fall work began with phase 1, to look really to see what concepts are essential to anchor our future review of potential pathways for our students. In this process, we have formed our subgroups with staff aligned to their areas of interest and expertise. And I have to say, the teachers are just amazing. They've really been above and beyond with their thoughtful insight and comments in this process, so it's really great to see. And Jeff does a great job leading it, of course. So our 3 groups are geometry, algebra, and then a special education team. And in the geometry subgroup that I'm part of, we began our research to review existing guidance, gather information on geometry programs nationwide, and really pose some great wonderings to guide us in our future work. Some of these current questions that our team is wrestling with are, what are current SAT tested core skills in geometry? What are some project-based learning opportunities we can add to our geometry course? What technology can be integrated into geometry to enhance our student learning and understanding? And how can we use geometry to reinforce algebraic concepts? And Jeff really provided our group with a lot of resources and guidance in terms of going out and finding our own resources. He also gave us a book called Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics. And this text is really great. It really, I think, is opening the team's eyes to potential pathways and new ideas. And one of the pieces in there talks about why it's important for students to have access to the essential concepts. And the author says to expand professional opportunities, to understand and critique the world, to experience the joy, wonder, and beauty of mathematics. And I really think this great team is excited to put all that work in to make sure our students are challenged, but also supported as they move forward. So turn it over to Angela King.
So going along with that, our special education subcommittee has members of the math department and special education department, and we're working to really review our math courses where students are placed through the PPT process. And in doing so, we're hoping to ensure that there's alignment between our special education courses and the essential skills and concepts that we want all students to have when they graduate high school.
Right, and I'm spearheading the algebra subgroup. So really, we're looking at what are some of the number and quantitative skills, what are the specific algebra skills, as well as, this is kind of the know, we didn't create this, but we know probability and statistics is kind of a given. So we know what we need to do in those areas. So our subgroup is really digging in more to the number and operations and the algebraic thinking that's required for all students. So after this fall, just to briefly give you an update of what will happen next, our group will then get together and develop a set of potential pathways, ones that will follow STEM and non-STEM possibilities. We don't want students to be stuck in that track. There's going to be flexibility to move between courses as needed. But what we're really trying to do is to develop really a 4-year action plan to roll out a potential beginning curriculum work this summer to make modifications to existing courses and potentially have the opportunity for some new possibilities and new opportunities in the future for students. But that's just a brief overview of our high school updates related to the Math CAT process, and this will be ongoing.
I just keep hearing tonight examples of Ridgefield Imagines after hearing from the students and the witness stones and then hearing about the Math CAT and all the work that you're imagining that we can do differently around the ways that students move through mathematics and the courses that we have to offer. So that's very exciting. So the last part we want to talk about is student supports. Next slide, please. We want to think about, in all that you've heard about mathematics, what do we currently have in place to support our students as they move through the different levels that Linda and Jeff described? So first of all, MTSS. You've heard probably several times already this year us talk about the work that we did in the spring, recalibrating and realigning our MTSS system, K-8, and really in high school. And Jeff and Jarrett and the crew at Ridgefield High School has done a lot of work around what that looks like when students transition into high school and are taking algebra and geometry and get the support through the algebra and geometry labs. So when we say MTSS, we do also include that part and that portion. So because we've done all this work on alignment, you can be assured that all the data teams at all of our buildings have met and looked at the student data across many different sources to see how the students are responding to instruction and then making decisions about what their needs are. So students who need intervention, if they're in K through 8th grade, there's a new level of support that we're calling Tier 1+, which is provided by the classroom teacher, but has a targeted goal. And you'll hear more and more about that across the year. So that's happening in mathematics. And then again, we have students in mathematics who are ready for more and are ready for some enrichment. And the K-8 MTSS process allows also for enrichment and support for students who need to go or are able to go more in depth around the math concepts that they're studying. So that's the MTSS process that we have. And again, this year, thankfully, we still have ESSER funds left. We are using our ESSER funds again for tutoring support, and that really is around the area of intervention, and our focus is mathematics, though we will also be providing support around ELA. But students who are showing that they need support will get it during the day, and then there's also an opportunity for support outside of the day. So it's in addition to whatever they may qualify for across the school day. And that's happening both at the elementary and middle school level. It's about to be rolled out. High school's next in a different way, but really K-8, we're responding to the needs of our students. And as we mentioned during our standardized testing report, students who did not make benchmark are being invited to get support after school, either right after school, right before school, and at the middle school, we're going to have some drop-ins again that are virtual because we want to make sure that we are best available for when our students are available, because we recognize that not everybody can come early or stay late at school. So those are ways that we're supporting our students. And then we have people. We have people in place. So as Linda mentioned before, we have our math specialists at the schools, and they're supporting students directly. That's their primary role. And then in addition to that role, they also share the hat with Jamie, where they're providing coaching, which supports all students in the classroom. So as Linda and Jamie talked about, one of the best parts of an implementation process is that feedback, getting together, noticing what large groups of students need. That's not an intervention. That's a classroom teacher's job to respond to what most students need. And that support is given by the math specialist, and then, as you heard, by Jamie. And I do have to mention that Linda said to me this afternoon that she has rolled out mathematics programs in 3 different districts in the past, and this is the first time that she's done so with a math coach, and it is Jamie, so those are 2 pluses, and it's never been this effective and this impactful. Jamie is absolutely in schools every single day.
That's
So-
why we're taking your desk away here at Central Office.
There might be a for rent sign at his desk because he's never there. So we have people supporting our teachers and people directly supporting our students. You cannot take away, you cannot underestimate the value for a teacher of seeing someone in your spot working with your kids, and in a way that feels like you can take risks and that you can try and that you can learn. More than anything, Ridgefield is a teaching and learning organization, not just for students, but for ourselves. And I think that's evident tonight as you're hearing about the implementation. So part of supporting students is always about supporting teachers. And then that extends to our department leaders, our opportunities for collaboration, our really, really strong instructional leaders, our administrators, as you heard from Jarrett and Angela, they are involved at all parts, all layers of this process. And then the time that we have for collaboration and calibration built into our schedule for professional learning, and how we come up with that professional learning, which is in response to district goals, but also in response to the feedback that I think they talked about tonight. So there are many different ways that we support our students in mathematics K-12.